22, good morning. This is Breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
Let's go through the papers now. Joining us this morning is the co-founder of the Together Association, Alan Miller, and journalist and author Ella Whelan. And thank you very much for being with us again. What are we kicking off with? Oh, Ella, the Daily Mail.
Well, yes, I don't want to embarrass you, Anne, but it has to be said that you are in a lot of the papers this morning with a very nice double spread there in the Daily Mail with a picture of you and your dog Ellie, which is lovely. And I don't want it's very awkward for me to sit here and try and tell your story for you, and I'm sure everybody watching will be delighted to have you back and know what you went through. But I think it is just remarkable. Everybody's picked up on the fact that you've been going through so much for the last 5 months and are back at work so soon. So welcome back, and we wish you all the well.
What's that? The Mirror?
The Mirror.
Got a picture of you and Nick Owen. You could have had a picture of me and you in there.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Well, and again, I don't want. I think, having known my mother had cancer, and I know that it can be very exhausting to go over it again and again and again. I'm not necessarily inviting you to do that, but just I think one of the things that the Mail picks up on is your relationship with your friends and the fact that you were able to have that solidarity among women with talking about how to use the word strategize around how to talk about cancer. And actually, I think that's so important that still a lot of people don't know how to have those conversations, because always with something like cancer, that is one of those words that just triggers people into thinking the worst.
And the funny thing is that if you are the victim of cancer, you're the one that's got it, it's devastating enough to be told it yourself. But then you realise at some point you're going to have to tell your loved ones.
Yes.
And you know how they're going to be devastated for you. And so you've got a double whammy in a way.
And you can control in a way how you're going to handle it, because you can get a hold of your emotions and decide how you're going to do it, but it's that terrible feeling of not being able to control how other people will react. But anyway,
everybody I told went white. They would, wouldn't they? And but it's funny, a lady came up to me in the street yesterday and said she'd been through exactly the same thing for 2 years before me, and she showed me her scars and everything. So, but she said, "Are you sure it's right to be going back to work yet?" And I said, "Well, I think I want to, yes, but you just have to recognise that I'll take things easy."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we wish you all the best.
Well,
I know that's exactly.
Having been a television inspiration for women for so many years, you are now an inspiration in fighting back against cancer.
Well,
thank you.
That's very kind of you to say so. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Let's move on
to the Telegraph. Alan, net zero isn't working, apparently.
Yes, indeed. So this is Charles Moore in the Telegraph talking about a vast coalition that's forming against excess green regulations. And he makes a very interesting point that now we've got a range of different people who are beyond flabbergasted, because obviously if you ask people, well, do you like to have a nice world with clean air? Everyone will say yes. But if you say, if you're going to have power cuts and are you going to have less money and you're not going to be able to travel, or you're going to have your roads closed with LTNs, you're going to have ULEZ impositions, then their response will be different. And Charles Moore points to the fact that you've got red wall voters, you've got independents, you've got conservatives who are opposed to it. We know that the story about Rachel Reeves, the point Ella made about the GMB and working people for being very concerned about this. Net zero mania, actually, it's a policy, it's a kind of hysteria that's about limits, restrictions, at this permanent state of crisis and emergency. And we've got to get very serious about robust wealth creation for everyone, infrastructure investment, growth, productivity, thinking about a kind of festival of Britain. Let's think about a kind of World's Fair of the future, and not the Conservatives, not the Labour Party. No one seems to be saying that. And where is the public in the heart of it? We sometimes hear about plans. It's a plan, it's not a plan. We need a robust plan that puts our needs, the public's needs, at the centre of things. So
it does need a lot of planning. Because I say what annoys me is, and mentioned it a few weeks ago on the show, where people were saying, "Oh yes, these people, they all need to be paid more." Well, it's that actually is an argument, doesn't mean anything, because you can't just suddenly pay people more. You do need a plan for economic growth, and so that there's a wealth creation for everybody. They said that's the kit, but that's going to take time. So.
Well, things do take time, but like when Nick Clegg said, "Oh, imagine if we all go to nuclear and then we won't have independence until 2020." The point is that we have to invest in infrastructure. We have to deal with our lack of ambition. And the point about wealth creation and about wages is that it was the historic discussion of the 20th century, whether, everyone wanted to see wage increases. We saw in America, for instance, working people earning like, $20 to $30 an hour in the 70s and 80s on the, having good living standards. Now we've got this sense that people who fly around in jets and with armour plate cars telling us that we have to have limits to our experience. It's just unacceptable. So I think he's onto a point here, and I'd encourage everyone to have their voices heard really about this.
But it's not really a government thing, is it? Because then it becomes political. I don't know. Other countries have done it, haven't they? I think particularly of some of the Scandinavian countries, they've had a dream and they've stuck to it. You go to those countries now and they seem to work.
Well, interesting.
They're very impressive.
Yeah, interestingly, Sweden has a significant amount of nuclear energy. France has 60 to 65%. Sweden has 35%. So investment in new infrastructure around those ideas are important. But I think that one of the problems with net zero and the idea about the public is that we're at fault. It's almost like that us wanting to consume, we're terribly out of control, we're toxic, it involves all the worst ideas about ourselves, rather than how can we harness our creativity, innovation, put our best foot forward with a sense of purpose to tackle problems, to resolve them, to be innovative, and think about the future and what we want to see. People often talk about, my children and the future. Well, let's all get involved and insist on having one that is the kind of future we want to see together.
Yeah, no, fair point. Fair point. The Guardian, Ella, looking at, Glastonbury has now said don't bring it, if you're going to go and party, don't bring a disposable vape.
Yes. This is sort of linked to what Alan was just talking about.
Yes, it is, actually.
Which is that, we've all seen them littered all over the streets and stuff, the little just very colourful, as they're criticised for being sort of semi-child friendly in their packaging, disposable vapes. Are a problem, not just because they litter, but they have these batteries in them and they're causing fires in recycling plants. So one of the problems is that they aren't able to be processed properly and they're causing big problems. And so Glastonbury has decided, along with knives and non-biodegradable body glitter, which are two things that I probably shouldn't be in the same category, but anyway.
No, knives should be slightly different.
Non-biodegradable
body glitter, I suppose, because it doesn't,
it's festivals.
makes all the cows very sort of shiny in the months afterwards. But they're banning them, or they're encouraging people not to bring them. That might be a sort of sensible move. It's probably, anything they can do to cut down the horrendous waste that's left after those festivals and make lives a bit more easier for the cleanup crew is one thing. But it does raise a question about the process of recycling, because it's interesting, of the last sort of few months, there have been criticisms of the whole idea of recycling, even in papers like The Guardian, which are very sort of heavy on the eco agenda, which is asking the question of whether or not this is all just kind of tokenistic, because we know that lots of the process of us cleaning out our jars and all the rest of it actually a lot of the time doesn't mean anything, not just because of the way recycling is handled internationally, but also because, it doesn't get processed properly, it's inefficient, a lot of it gets burnt. Actually, one of my colleagues, Rob Lyons at the Academy of Ideas, has pointed out that really the only thing that's worthwhile recycling is metals, because it's more efficient to reuse it than it is to get it out of the ground. But your plastics, glass, and all the rest of it is actually a waste of time, us sitting there trying to get the last bit of jam out of the jar. And instead, as Alan says, instead of thinking about how we can limit our experience, we should be thinking about how we can create more and more efficiently, greener, yes, but also cheaper, better, faster for people. And I think recycling is one of those things where we hang on to it as a sort of tokenistic measure. I'm doing the right thing, when in actual fact it might not be that good for the planet.
I don't understand. Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what drives me mad, because I don't think we should be using single-use plastics. And I'm worried going into the ocean, all the rest of it. You go to the co-op, the bags you get are made of cellulose or something. You can compost them. Now, you wouldn't know it wasn't plastic. So it's just like...
Well, would
it be more efficient to invest in, when you buy anything new, a glass to drink your water from or whatever, that is something that can be used for life?
Yeah.
would it be more efficient to invest in that sort of thing than recycling the old?
Yeah, well, we are very bad at the moment about using stuff. So if you take the issue of cars, everybody should buy, and now we're being told everybody buy a new electric car. What about just hanging on to your car and making it run better and repairing it and using it more? But the question of plastic packaging is interesting because actually the emissions and the whole process of dealing with food waste, which food goes off unless it's in plastic, is far worse than plastic. Than the problem of plastics, yeah. So it's you have to be planned about this. You have to actually think about what really
joint
works.
thinking, isn't it? And can you trust any government to do that? That's
Well, I think
whether it should be a completely different body.
There is a thing about all of this as well, isn't there, about personal responsibility. I mean, I went to Burning Man. I know it's a bit worthy in some ways, but you're encouraged to leave no trace. Now, in that instance, in the Arizona desert, where it has an impact, people collect their stuff and don't leave it there. It's also a question about vapes more generally, right? I agree with Ella's points about the recycling issue, but on the one hand, we've got a bit of a war on vapes. It's like they're being demonised. I think in many ways they're far healthier than smoking. That's been proved epidemiologically. But it's also the case that people can stop, right? People have conscious choice. They make decisions. This whole idea that you're addicted to everything forever and you can't, I think that's another myth that is perpetuated. And so there's a combination of things. We got very into banning things, but not actually thinking about how we want to kind of do our behaviour, how we want to actually do things ourselves.
It's not a bad point with vapes, though, is it? In the sense that, you know, you don't have to have a disposable vape. You get a non-disposable vape, you know, which then isn't causing this problem. I mean, it's a pretty easy solution. No one's saying, or in this case, they're not saying don't vape. They're just saying do it differently. And actually, it's cheaper not to buy a disposable vape.
Well, I hear that, but there is a question about how efficient we are at doing the things we're trying to encourage. We're saying that the government and others telling everyone to do. We spend our whole time working out where we're putting our rubbish. How efficient is that? How sensible? Yeah. We're told it's a virtue. It's almost like a secular religion. Yeah. But if we're actually going to be effective and we're going to deal with things rationally, then we need to deal with it in that context, not just what seems to be apparent. And I think there's a fickleness and a superficiality in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, no, well, it's a really valid point. I'd love your thoughts on that, if you would. GBViews at GBNews.com. Ella, Alan, been good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
We've got lots more to come.
We have.
Including, is there any way back for Boris? Does he even want to come back? This is GB News.